Sorry.
Nice to see you.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Okay, here's Jennifer. Okay. All right. So today, what I'd like to do is we are starting the new Sefer, the book of Shemot, the book of Exodus. And what I wanted to do was to kind of back up and take an overall look at the book of Shemot, at the book of Exodus, because sometimes we're so in the thick of a parsha, of a word here, a word there, which is incredibly instructive and incredibly meaningful. And at the same time, sometimes we lose our sense of what the whole thing is all about. And so what I wanted to do was to kind of zoom out and take an overall look, and specifically taking a look at what the name of this book is called. So in English, or I should say in Latin, it is Exodus. Okay, and why is it called Exodus, the book of Exodus? So that shouldn't be too hard of a guess, because what appears to be the main event is the exodus of the Jewish people from their enslavement in Egypt. That's on the surface is what it appears to be. In Hebrew, the book is called Shemot because of the opening, the way the entire book opens up is on page 292, which is chapter 1 of the book of Shemot. Ve'ela Shemot B'nai Yisrael. And these are the names of B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel, who were coming down to Mitzrayim. And so it's called Shemot because of that. However, it also has some other names, and what we call something instructs us and inspires us about what the thing is. So if it's called Shemot, it's called names. That's its name from the way it's structured in Torah, Ve'ela Shemot. That's how we derive the names of all the parshas, is from one of the key opening words of the first sentence of the book or of the parsha. But it's considered not just like, oh, well, it happens to be names. It's because the names are so important, not the least of which, one of the things that we're going to learn by the end of the enslavement in Egypt, that when the Jewish people left, their names were still Hebrew. Even after 210 years of oppression in Egypt, they had not taken on Egyptian names. And this always makes me feel a little, not nervous, but whatever, about our names that we have. You know, Ellyn is not exactly a name that appears in the Torah. It's not, it comes from Helen of Troy, so I can't really claim any Jewish connection. And guessing many others, there's a few of us here who do have Hebrew names here that we've got Esther, Tamara, Yael, so this is good. And Beth, at least we got, that's a Bat, that's good. So we're kind of there. But to think about the Jewish people being in the land of Egypt for all those years and still leaving with their names intact, it's considered one of the merits of the Jewish people that they deserved to leave Egypt. Is one of the things was that they did not change their names. And that's huge, because there's an incredible amount of pressure. Think about the pressure on our relatives, people who came, whether they came to Galveston or whether they came to, what's it called, in New York. I can't think of it. Somebody help me here.
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island.
Ellis Island, thank you. And people had an opportunity to change their names so they could fit in, or even if the officers didn't even understand what they were saying, they just wrote down whatever they wanted. Who knows? But a lot of what somebody is called in the world is huge. And the fact that the Jewish people, even being oppressed and wanting to assimilate, wanting to go in, that there was a limit to it, and they didn't change their names and they didn't change their dress. So their external, the way they were known in the world and the way they appeared in the world, stayed within the Jewish people, which is really, really huge. So it's not like, oh, they didn't change their names as some small thing. That was really an amazing accomplishment. So calling this entire Sefer, this entire book, Shemot, the names, these are the names. The fact that they were the names when they went down, and then when they came out of Egypt, they were still the names, that is incredible. However, there are other names for this book as well. So another name is called the Sefer of Galus and Geula. Galus and Geula is the book of exile and redemption. because that's basically the story of the Exodus. So it's called Exile and Redemption, not only because it is the book that describes the exile and redemption of the Jewish people at that time from Egypt, but because it would become the formula, the pattern for the future exiles and redemptions. And so that we would look at it as just like as a map for how the exile happens and how the redemption is going to happen as well. So it's also called the book of Geula, of Galut veGeula. Then it has another name, which I never heard until just this week, which is it is also called Book 2. Now, that's not really so creative. If you're going to come up like, and what would you call this book? Book 2. It's like Book 2. So this is based on a Gemara, and it's also the position of the Netziv and the Bahag, different commentators. It says, why is it called Book 2? These same commentators don't, it's not as if Bereshit is called Book 1 and Exodus is called Book 2, and it's 3, 4, and 5. The other ones all have names except for this one. So the first one is called the Sefer Bereshit, the Sefer of beginning, or Sefer Yetzirah, the book of formation of how everything was created. The book of Leviticus is called Torah Kohanim, the Torah of the Kohanim, of the Levites, of everything we have about the holiness code. And then we have the Pekudim, the Sefer Pekudim, which is the book of Numbers. And then the book of Deuteronomy is called the Mishnah Torah. So it's not for want of creativity for like, what should we call this? And then we have, and Shemot is called Book 2. It's like, why do you call it Book 2? Book 2 by definition means it's in relationship to Book 1. So the Genesis, Bereshit, that Sefer HaYetzirah, the book of formation of reality, is the second part of that. Now, this is, even though it is very uncreative literarily, it is very instructive as far as what it tells us about what the meaning of the entire book of Shemot is all about. So when we go back to the idea of the exile and redemption, there's a little bit of problem of calling the book the Sefer of Galut, of exile and redemption, which is what constitutes the exile. That's the enslavement in Egypt. But what constitutes redemption? So if you're going to talk about what's the redemption of the Jewish people, which parshas are those? Which parshas are those? So if anyone wants to unmute, which parshas are the parshas that talk about when does the redemption end? Or where would you do the cutoff of redemption there? How does that work? Etta.
At Sinai?
Okay, why are you saying that? Yes, say why.
Because we were brought out of Egypt to be Hashem's servants here on earth. So
okay.
We were redeemed for that purpose, I thought.
Great, exactly. And that's in fact what God tells Moshe. When God talks to Moshe at the burning bush, which is at Mount Sinai, is at Horeb, he says, you will return here and worship me. So that's going to be the full circle, is when the Jewish people are redeemed. That redemption is not just leaving Egypt. It's not even just going through as spectacular as it was, it's not even just going through the split sea. It is going to Mount Sinai. Okay, so that's a very good answer. And that should take us through then Parsha Yitro and maybe Mishpatim. Those are the two things, the additional laws. But we still have more parts of so why doesn't the book end there? Okay, got the Torah, and now we should end the Sefer of exile and redemption. We got out of Egypt, we crossed the sea, we got to Sinai, we got the laws, end of this book. Now let's go on to the next one, except that's not the end. And instead it goes on to talk about a number of parshas that have to do with what else is on the agenda. The next thing is about the building of the Mishkan. Like, well, what does that have to do with the redemption? Like, what does that have to do with anything? Is that just kind of like tacked on just to make it a little bit more even? It's like, no, that actually has to do with redemption as well. When we put this all together, we're going to see why it is called redemption. It's like, what does redemption really mean? It wasn't just about being redeemed from Egypt. Full redemption is like when we say refuah shlema to somebody, I've shared this before and I'm always struck by it. When we say refuah shlema, we don't mean just that the person should be healed from whatever their ailment is. We mean they should be restored to the way they were before. It means that they should be at the least, that the time that they spent while they weren't feeling well and couldn't lead their lives in the way they really wish they could have, that time should not be deducted from their allotted time in this world, and they should have their time restored. It just reminds me of of some sort of a legal proceeding. If you're going to really make full restitution to somebody, you should return them, and we call that making them whole. That's why it's called a refuah shlema, a complete healing. Like you are completely restored. So if we're going to have a geula shlema, if we're going to have a complete redemption, what does it mean that we're trying to return to? It's not just, thank God we're out of Egypt and now we have the Torah and that was the purpose of the Jewish people. You will serve me God says you will serve me on this mountain, etc. I'll give you the Torah and that's your mission. But what are we being returned to such that we need to also have the Mishkan parshas in there as well? There's something more that needs to happen. There's another piece in all this. Leslie.
To return to the land, to return to Holy Land, to return to the Holy Land.
Okay, great. Return to the Holy Land. And that would be the ultimate. That being said, we never actually get there. And the entire Torah, we never get there. We don't get to the Holy Land until we enter the book of Joshua. And even Moshe doesn't get there. So our geula, our redemption, is going to stop short of that. But in a way, it's going to go to a level that's I won't say more important in the land of Israel, because that's not the case, but it is as essential to the redemption as that, which is that there needs to be what's called the return of the divine presence of the Shekhinah has to be restored to the Jewish people and to the world. It says, when was it like that? Etta.
The Garden of Eden.
The Garden of Eden. It says, when did we have the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was in the Garden of Eden? And it's described, if you want to go to Genesis, to Bereshit. By the way, this shir is from Rabbi Daniel Gladstein, who's just like a wonderful teacher. Learning from him is amazing. And primarily based on the sources from the Nitziv and from the Ramban and from the Bahag and the Gemara. So when Adam and Eve are in the Garden of Eden after they sin with the eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there's a very interesting description. This is on page 17. It's chapter 3, verse 8. And it says, they, meaning Adam and Eve, heard the sound of Hashem God manifesting itself in the garden toward evening. And the man and his wife hid from Hashem God among the trees of the garden. It says, what does that mean? They heard the sound of Hashem God manifesting itself in the garden toward evening. It's like the trees rustling. Like, what does that mean? It says, that description is meant to say, where was the divine presence when Adam was created? It says, God's presence was immanent, not just transcendent. The immanent presence of God is called the Shekhinah, and it's like as if it makes a sound manifesting itself in the garden. With the sin and with the punishment, it says that Shekhinah leaves. It kind of goes back up 7 layers. It goes up into not as accessible, and that the world suffers from that. It starts to come back down with our matriarchs and patriarchs. How do we know that? So we know that from Sarah. If you remember from the parsha of Chaye Sarah, when Sarah dies, it says that there were 3 things that ended with her death that did not come back until Rivka comes into her tent. One was, it says that the bread that stayed fresh from one Shabbos to the next, that stopped. That the light, the illumination of her candles, which stayed lit from one Shabbos to the next, stopped. and the divine presence, which was not hovering over her tent, but was tethered to her tent, manifesting itself down in this world, that also ended. And then when Rivka came, then it came back. So our matriarchs and patriarchs were the beginning steps of basically taking us back to the Garden of Eden. And then with the exile to Egypt, all that ends again. And we're back to kind of square one. We have to go through a reconnecting process and have that as our redemption. Leslie.
So I have a question.
Yes.
Even though God talks to Abraham, that is not the same thing as the divine presence being with Sarah. Please explain
Exactly.
that.
Very good question. It's probably above my pay grade to totally understand that, since we're talking about the matters of the divine, but there's something different about it in that Sarah, God talks to Abraham and Abraham talked to God, is different than having a manifestation of God's reality in this world. It says that Sarah's tent made God's presence real. It's like the job of the Jewish people is to manifest God's reality in this world. And that's without him even talking to us. When he talks to us through Torah and through Nevuah, through the prophecy that we read, it's when there's evidence of the relationship. So you can talk about a relationship, but what's the evidence of the relationship? The evidence of the relationship existed in Sarah's tent. By those things, her connection to God was grounded, and you could see it, feel it, taste it, it was experiential in Sarah's world, which is exactly what the Mishkan represents. Because you could say, why do we need a Mishkan? We say in the Kedusha that God's presence fills all of reality. So what does that mean? Why do I need a Mishkan? So the Mishkan comes from the word Shekhinah, Shochen, which means to dwell, an imminent, I can feel it and experience it, presence of God. Does that help a little bit of what that difference might be? So when we're talking about, so why do we need the Mishkan? It's because we need to get back to Sarah's tent. And Sarah's tent was the miniature version of what happened in the Garden of Eden, where God's presence was there and it was relatable, you could experience it. So by the time, so when we have the matriarchs and patriarchs, there's not so many people. So Sarah is the one who is the embodiment of this, which is, and it's called Sarah's tent. And one of the names for the Mishkan, and the Mishkan was a tent. It was an Ohel. That's why it's called the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. That was like Sarah's tent. So that then, if you go to the very end of the book of Exodus, or not what we can understand is really book 2, when you go to the end of book 2, what do we have that's finally happening after we go through the entire process of the enslavement and what happens to our enemies, and we get out and we have Pesach and split the sea, etc., etc., etc. The very, very end of the book of Exodus, the book of Exodus, the end of book 2 is, hold on, let me turn to it. Is on page 541 in the Chumash. And the very last thing, the conclusion, because it says, just how we have a connection between the beginning of a parsha and the end of a parsha, of an individual parsha, we also have a connection between the beginning of the entire Sefer, the book of Shemot, and the end of Shemot. Connects, like, what was the point of the whole thing? So here we have, and we have now verses 34 through 38, and it's all about the divine presence. And says, the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle. Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting, for the cloud rested upon it, and the glory of Hashem filled the tabernacle. Then it talks about when the cloud was raised, etc., etc. And then the last verse, verse 38, for the cloud of Hashem would be on the tabernacle by day, and fire would be on it at night, before the eyes of all of the children of Israel throughout their journeys. Like, that is the conclusion, is the Mishkan is there. God's presence is relatable, visible, there in this world. And now we are back. That is the Geula. That's the true Geula of taking us back to the Garden of Eden. Renee.
Thank you. So you said something that I've never heard before. You said that the place of meeting was actually Sarah's tent.
What I said is that just as Sarah's tent is called Ohel Sarah, Ohel means tent, the name of the Mishkan, where it was called the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, because it was a tent. It is modeled after Sarah's tent.
Okay.
Sarah's tent was the first one. The Ohel Moed is the second one. You could say the really first one was the Garden of Eden. In the
Right.
Garden of Eden, that was where God's presence was fully known and seen and experienced. And there was that what's called dat. There was true knowledge of God in that place. Then the Jewish people kind of start the preliminary steps in book 1, in Bereshit, when we have with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, and that gets started again to like, okay, we're doing the initial version. You could call it almost that Bereshit is almost the prequel of Shemot, which is why it has to be called book 1 and book 2. It's not like, okay, now we're done with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and now we're on to the next story. It's like, no, book 2 is the unfolding of book 1 and of Bereshit, and then completing the picture and getting us back to the Garden of Eden. So once we are there, that's why those things go together. Book 1 and book 2, Bereshit and Shemot, they are their own kinds of creation. So now we are back to the garden. We are back to the garden with the end of Shemot. So that now we are given the entire book of Shemot is setting out what the pattern of history is going to be. Because now we know we've had the building of the Beit HaMikdash twice. So we kind of keep going through this pattern over and over again. And then there's going to be the third and final, and then we're going to have it down good. But the pattern is going to be the pattern that we see in Shemot. And that's why we study it so carefully so that we can understand what it's going to be like. Etta, did you have another comment, a question? Okay.
Good, thank you.
Sure. So that's what we're looking at. So that's one reason why it is called book 2, is that we will get there. Now, what's interesting is, have you ever heard about, it says that there are 4 exiles of the Jewish people. Have you ever heard that before? There's 4 exiles of the Jewish people, and they are described as, what are those exiles? It says Babylonia, Persia, Madai, the Greeks, and the Romans. Okay, so it says those are the 4 exiles. Do you notice that there's something dramatically missing from that list?
Egypt.
Egypt. There's no Egypt in there. It's like, wait a minute, what about Egypt? Isn't that like our biggest one? It says Egypt is a real place, but it's a description of all of them. It is going to be, again, like a boilerplate pattern for what exile and redemption is going to look like. It's called Mitzrayim. So Rabbi Gladstein points out that's very interesting because there's kind of an awkward verse at the beginning of Shemot, at the beginning of the entire book of Exodus. It says, going back to page 293, and it says verse 1, and these are the names of the children of Israel who were coming to Egypt. Does anything sound a little strange about that? And that's a correct translation of the Hebrew, actually. The Eileh Shemot, these are the names, Bnei Yisrael, of Bnei Yisrael, Habayim, who are coming, Mitzrayma, toward Egypt. Okay? So that's what sounds weird about that. Beth Ann, so you want to unmute? I'm sorry, I still can't hear you. Okay. Leslie, okay, Leslie.
They weren't taken. They went willingly.
Okay, good, very nice. Okay, for sure, exactly, that's beautiful. We went down willingly, and the reason we went down willingly is because we were reuniting. Well, we were starving, exactly, and Joseph had been reunited with his brothers, and they go back to get Jacob and come down, and so there is, God sweetens the deal. even though it says that Jacob was very concerned. He was afraid to go down. And God appears to him before he goes down and says, don't be afraid, I will be with you. And it says that God, the divine presence, is really basically in exile as well. And he says before Jacob goes down, hold on a second, I'll just read this. This goes back to page 259. Actually go back to page 257, chapter 46, verse 2, actually verse 1. So Israel, meaning Jacob, set out with all he had, and he came to Beersheba, where he slaughtered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. God spoke to Israel in night visions, and God said, Yaakov, Yaakov. Anytime somebody's name is called doubly means I'm calling you for a mission. Kind of like Moshe, Moshe, Abraham, Abraham means I'm calling you. And Jacob answered, Hineni, here I am. And that response of Hineni means at your service, I'm ready to do. And God said, verse 3, I am the God of your father. Have no fear of descending to Egypt, for I shall establish you as a great nation there. I shall descend with you to Egypt, and I shall also surely bring you up. And Joseph shall place his hand on your eyes, meaning you will die peacefully, and your son Joseph will close your eyes and bury you. So don't be afraid to go down, because Jacob knew what it meant to go down to Egypt, because they already had the promise that Abraham had been told, you're going to go down, you can be strangers in a strange land for 400 years, you'll be oppressed, and I will redeem you with a strong hand and outstretched arms. Like, he knew what that meant. So like, why would you want to go down there? And yet, Habaim, they were coming willingly, because God sweetens the going down. It's like, it's not just that you're fleeing because you're hungry, you're also going to your son. And that makes it different. So they're going down. So what's interesting is at the end of the previous parsha, from the end of Vayechi, we already know the names of everybody who went down. It already listed them. And so why does it say? Because they were already in Egypt. Okay, so by the time Genesis ended, is that what you're going to say, Beth Ann? They were already in Egypt. Why are you saying that they were coming to Egypt? It makes it sound like they're coming now. It makes it sound like the book of Shemot is opening up with the Jews. Here are the names of the children of Israel who are coming to Egypt in real time. Now the opening of the book of Exodus. Like, that's not the case. They had already been in Egypt for many years. So why is it saying about that in the present tense? So here's a beautiful, it's not a gematria, it's like, they're called Roshei Tevot. It says the word Ba'im, Habaim, that those are the first letters of each of the exiles the Jewish people would have. Ha means the, so that's just a prefix. The Bet is for Bavel. The Aleph is for Edom, which is Rome. The Yud is for Yevanim, which are the Greeks. And the Mem is for Madai, which is Persia. So it says that they were coming down Mitzrayim, that each of those four exiles, that's what they were coming to, and that Mitzrayim was going to be the way to understand each of the exiles, how they would work, and how the redemption would work. Those four exiles are also referred to again in a different way from the book of Genesis, from the book of Bereshit, before we get to book 2, which is, it says that the brothers went down to Egypt 4 times. They went first without Benjamin to go get food. They went down again with Benjamin to get food. They went down a 3rd time with their father Jacob and their whole household. And they went a 4th time when they returned from burying Jacob. So all in all, there were 4 descents to Egypt, which are all kind of a dramatic foreshadowing of there's going to be 4 exiles. There's going to be 4 going downs, and that Egypt was going to be the pattern for how to look at that. And that when we study what happened in Egypt and what happened with our redemption, it is not to say, oh, look what happened then. Let's see what we can learn about what happened then. It's all about, let's see what's going to happen in the future, because this is going to be how it's going to all unfold in the future. So book 2 is about the rest of the story. thoughts or questions just about that part of understanding it as book 2? Renee,
What's the word, habayim?
I'm not hearing you.
Oh, habayim, can you spell it for me?
Habayim is Hey, Bet, Aleph, Yud, Mem. So if you have a Chumash in front of you, it's on page 292. Ve'ele Shemot B'nai Yisrael, Habayim Mitzrayma. Makes no sense whatsoever in any context that they are coming down to Egypt. They were already there. We already knew that from the end of Bereshit. So it's like, what are you talking about? It's like, oh, Habayim. This is all of the 4 different exiles that the Jewish people would be subjected to. And they're all going to follow this pattern. Okay. All right. Now, yes, Leslie, were you going to say something? No? Okay. All right. So that's one section about why this is called book 2. A second understanding about why it is called book 2 is that the building of the Mishkan and the divine presence, it says, yes, the Greeks conquering us is considered an exile. There was an exile in our own land, which is really scary. It's like, right, you can be a prisoner in your own country. You know, if you're a Jew in Germany and whatever, you're in your own country and you're being oppressed. And yeah, so you don't even have to be, in fact, that's why a person, even today, if you're having your Seder in the old city of Jerusalem, you say, L'shana haba'a b'Yerushalayim habniyah. Next year, we should have the rebuilt Jerusalem. It's like you're sitting in Jerusalem in a really nice apartment. It's like not the same thing as having it all completely complete. So yes, Etta, did you have a question?
No, just a comment, if you have a moment. I read a book called The Jew in Exile. It's a great book from a Canadian rabbi. And he goes through all the exiles, exactly how they all started and ended the same way in Egypt. You come in as an honored guest, you rise to power, the people there are jealous and unhappy with you. They try to get rid of you, and you leave. And all the exiles are kind of the same.
Exactly.
Not so much Greek, maybe, because we were in the land, but all the other exiles seems to be like from Spain, it was very interesting.
Yes, it is. They just one moment, Renee. They do all follow this pattern, and they also, there's something else that we'll talk about how the Egyptians, what their approach was, that has been a total constant in all of those. So those exiles are, I would call mini exiles, because they all stem from the fact that we are in all of these other countries, that we've been in Spain and Germany and all these other places, is because of the destruction of the Second Temple. That's how we all got as far flung as we have gotten. So you could say those are all, I would call those ripple exiles, as we are kind of bounced from one country to the next, following this exact same pattern. You'd think we would learn, but we haven't quite yet what this means. So we're going to talk about something else as far as the pattern. And unfortunately, we see it today. It's very sad. Renee.
So what Etta brought up, I feel like is really, really significant. And I know that you just explained is the ripple effect of the Second Temple, like the diaspora, but I'm sorry, I'm kind of challenging my mind here, and maybe challenging, you can help me with this. I do feel like like going to Europe and the whole being expelled from Spain and the whole Holocaust, but that is significant because we landed back in Israel. That's because of that we created the Jewish nation again.
Yes, and so there's lots of ways looking at the exile. You could say, why did we even have to go to Egypt? Like, why did we have to go there? So there's all sorts of explanations, but one explanation that I like, that is also used to describe our dispersal around the entire globe, says is that when Adam sinned in the Garden of Eden, that was really the beginning of our problems. And not just like we got out of the Garden of Eden. It says that there was the sparks of holiness then got flung out. You can imagine like the total like Big Bang, not just the Big Bang of creation, but the Big Bang of spirituality, that the holy sparks got flung out throughout all of creation, and that the Jewish responsibility is to collect the sparks. And the reason we had to go to Egypt was to collect the sparks from Egypt. And they say, well, what does that mean? It says, every country has its wealth, its wisdom, its culture, as something beneficial that needs to be extracted and brought to a place of holiness, meaning like brought to the land of Israel. I think I've had reason to share this before, but kind of similarly, it's kind of tongue in cheek, but true that when our kids made Aliyah, and we got to watch a live stream of them landing at Ben Gurion, coming down the steps, kissing the ground, being greeted by all the dignitaries and being talked to. I thought it was by Netanyahu, but it may have been by somebody else. But he was saying, we are so welcoming of people coming from America, and all you have to contribute to us, like good customer service, and everybody like burst out laughing because like, is that what America has to contribute to Israel? I'm like, yes, I'm hopefully there's probably some other things too. It's like every country has its wisdom. As we say, there's 70 nations, and we don't believe that they're all the same. We believe there is not to be stereotypical about or stereotyping people, but there are generalizations about what different cultures have as their gift that may have gotten totally distorted by their nation, because if it's not under the rubric of something of a holiness pattern, then it's going to go off track. Being German and being very organized, on time, et cetera, is a huge thing until it's, lining people up to annihilate them because they don't meet the Aryan code. Then that's bad. So every nation has its nitzitzut. It has its sparks that need to be gathered. And so with this, the kind of the result of the sin of eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the diminishing of Adam, and means that all the holy sparks went out into creation. And who are the shell gatherers? Literally, the spark gatherers, the Jewish people. And we're actually very good at it. Jews acclimate and accommodate their host culture better than the natives of the land. We are more Greek, more German, more Spanish, more American than anybody else. So it's just kind of ironic that we're accused of being disloyal, because we are loyal to the nth degree, more so than we should be. We're like in it. So this is because we really relate to it. And you see Jewish people, when you go to Israel and you see Jewish people who are from different countries, they have absorbed whatever their nation of origin is, they've absorbed those cultural things. I had a friend who went to visit the Jewish community through Federation, the Jewish community in Cuba. And she said it was so different than visiting the Jewish community in the former Soviet Union. Now, they're not that many generations separated, she said, but the Jews of the former Soviet Union are more Soviet. And the Jews of Cuba are more Latin, and they're more like Cuban, because we absorb it and we reflect it. In fact, one beautiful description, it says, the Jews have no face, and that we're mirrors. We are mirrors of whoever it is we are with, and that's we reflect back. We're meant to reflect God in this world, but in the meantime, we're reflecting everybody else that we're around. So the Jews needed to go to Egypt. If you're going to oppress somebody, so why don't you just send them off to some deserted island? Like, why does it have to be? They have to descend and go down into the greatest country, the greatest nation in the world. Why do they have to go there? Same thing with the Jews in Spain, same thing with the Jews in Germany. Why do they have to go such great places? It's like, that's where all the sparks are. And you got to collect them. And when you collect them and bring them back, that's called an ingathering of the exiles also. It's not just the ingathering of the people, it's the ingathering of the qualities that have been spread out throughout the world that need to be brought under the tent, the ohel, a tent of holiness, so that they can be properly used, manifested in this world. So that's where we go down. So you could say, is it good that we've been spread around? I would say good meaning beneficial. Beneficial means that it serves. So good in Torah world means it serves a purpose. Does it serve a purpose? It serves a purpose. I think there was somebody, I don't know if it was Beryl Wine or somebody else, who said, made the connection, connected the dots about the expulsion of the Jews from Spain and Christopher Columbus leaving on the 10th or the 11th of Av to go out exploring, and then the discovery of the New World. And here we are in the United States of America now. That then America then becoming a place of refuge for Jewish people from the European countries to come to in the face of persecution. So at the very moment that the Jews are being persecuted and are having to leave Spain, it's like help is on the way, going the other direction for several hundreds of years later to be able to be a source of rescue for the Jewish people. So was it a good thing? Was it a bad thing? All we can say is it's a thing. All we can say is this is a pattern, and it's been already set out. And if we look at it with, I'm going to say with book 2 eyes, we can look and see how things are unfolding and what the similarities are. And on one hand, you'd be like, ugh, this is kind of depressing. And on the other hand, it's like, okay, this is kind of inspiring because we know how the story's going to end. The story's going to end with the return of the divine presence. The story's going to end with book 2. The story's going to end that the redemption will be complete. And as Leslie pointed out, it'll be really complete when the Jewish people are in the land of Israel, when the Beit HaMikdash is rebuilt, and that is considered, it will make the world stable. It says before the building of the Mishkan, it says the world was wobbly. Sarah and Sarah's tent kind of stabilized the world a little bit, like her general area. The Mishkan stabilized it more. The Beit HaMikdash will stabilize it completely, which kind of helps us understand why people have wanted to destroy it. It's like, it's such a beautiful building. Why not use it for your own purposes? Seriously, it was beautiful. Just why burn it? That's like so stupid. So unless you really want to destroy it because you don't like what it stands for. So when it stands for the divine presence being in the world, then you want to destroy it if you're not ready for that reality. So when it's rebuilt and it will be firmly established, then it'll stabilize all of creation. It'll bring creation to its ultimate purpose, which is to have the manifest presence of God in the world, and human beings will understand their purpose in the world. All efforts will be understood in their healthiest form. And as we said, we're not expecting people to become Jewish. We're not looking for that. They just need to see how they fit in the puzzle. They just need to see how they fit into the total picture. I think when you say, will this be pre or post Mashiach? Good question. The rebuilding of the temple, I think, is actually pre-Mashiach. I think that is one of the tests of, are you the Mashiach? It's like, did you rebuild the temple? So it's not like I will do it because, good intentions aren't enough. So it has to be that there will be a rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. So the timing, I don't know. I'd be very happy to see it one way or the other. So I don't know. I've seen different things about how that works. But what that means is that there will be a stabilizing. Just look at the world today. It's like, it's a little crazy out there. It is, you don't have to look too far. It is not stable. And so we say, like, well, if the world knew what the Beit HaMikdash would do for them, not just for us, if they knew what it would do for them, they'd be forcing us to build it. They would say, you get there and you rebuild that thing because we need it. So that's if they understood. But they're not quite there yet. So humanity has a way to go. We're still in Mitzrayim. We're still in the exile. So we look at this Sefer of book 2 of Shemot, of the Sefer of Galut v'Geula, and we see a pattern for Jewish history. And it is meant, again, to direct us, to give us faith, and to help us understand why we are in the straits that we are in and how it's all going to unfold. So we're talking about patterns. Let's take a look at one of the things that the Egyptians did that is very common in every age down to today, unfortunately. So it said, hold on one second. On page 295, and it says that they appointed taskmasters over it, meaning the Jewish people, in order to afflict it with their burdens. And it says in Hebrew, lema'an anoto, and it says like to afflict it. And then it continues on in the next verse. Hold on one second. In verse, is it 12? Verse 12. It says, but as much as they would afflict it, so it would increase, and so it would spread out, and they became disgusted because of the children of Israel. The Egyptians enslaved the children of Israel with crushing harshness. It says, what is it that they did there? It says, Ya'anu oto. Ya'anu oto in the Hebrew, asher ya'anu oto, that they oppressed it. It says that they didn't oppress them directly. What it means is that they made the Jewish people look bad in the eyes of Egyptians. They started spreading blood libels about them. The Jews are the cause of COVID. The Jews are the cause. I just saw a thing from the church. The Jews are the cause of Christians leaving, there being fewer Christians in the land of Israel. It has nothing to do with the Jews. It's the Muslims who are attacking them and destroying their churches and killing them and doing also, it's the Jews. The Jews are the cause of that. The Jews invented the vaccine to make money. Jews are this, all of this is, they're controlling the world. It says they started this rumors about the Jewish people to dehumanize them so that when there was an edict to destroy them, the people would be willing and ready to do it. Just exactly like the Nazis did, just like the Inquisition. Every single country has been exactly the same. So when we look at this, instead of being like, when people say, I can't believe what's being said, it's like, how are you surprised? This was laid out for us 3,000 years ago, and every single approach has been exactly the same. It follows the exact same pattern.
Ellyn, excuse me.
Yes,
in Israel, in modern Israel, what they've done, like in Bethlehem, there were a lot of Christian businesses there, jewelry and junk stuff or whatever. And so they started shooting it up and they killed people, and then they destroyed their businesses and they took it over.
Yes.
And so that it's the same old thing.
It's the same old thing. And it's, and this was the Archbishop of Canterbury, who came out, I guess, just like yesterday or whatever, to say that it's the Jews in Israel who he's calling. Marcia, if you wouldn't mind now muting, I'm sorry, since we're here.
I'm sorry, my dog's barking. Sorry.
I know. They're calling it an extremist group, but they are not naming the Arabs or the Muslims. It's the Jews are doing. It's like the Jews have nothing to do with it. The Jews pay, Israeli taxes go to pay to protect Christian sites. I mean, it's so absurd and obscene. You would have to laugh if you didn't cry over the allegations. And people believe this because these are top people saying this in the church. So it's really horrible. But I'm like, oh my gosh, they're saying this during this parsha. I'm like, not only is the pattern repeating itself, it's even the same week. It's like, yeah, I know, we just read that. You made us look bad to the Egyptians. You're making us look bad to the world when we're not doing anything. So it's really, it's very challenging. Okay, so that is another way for us to understand that book 2 means that it is a source of inspiration, lest we think that the last thing that happens is Jacob and his family goes down to Egypt. That's it. It's like, no, don't forget about book 2. Don't forget about part 2 of the story. Because if you don't have part 2, then part 1 just kind of leaves you feeling completely hopeless. So then there is another level as well, which is, how do we understand that the Mishkan, to which the entire book of Shemot, of Exodus, of book 2, devotes numerous parshas to the building of the Mishkan? So we know that the person who was in charge and who was named by God to be the person to be in charge of building the Mishkan was Bezalel. Bezalel means Betzel Kel, in the shadow of God. And it describes him. It says that he was a person of Chachma, Bina, and Da'at, of wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. He was only 13 years old when he was put in charge of this project. Now, I don't care how many afternoon chugim classes he went to on building or crafts or whatever in Egypt. There's no way that he was naturally knowledgeable about anything having to do with the construction of the Mishkan to be put in charge of it. Nothing. But there's a beautiful comment that says that it was back in creation that God had already designated Bezalel to be the one to build the Mishkan, because that was going to be the completion of creation. Bereshit only talks about the beginning part of creation, the physical creation, beginning of the Jewish family. It's not until book 2 that we get to the purpose of creation, which is to have the Jewish people, the Torah, the Mishkan, God's presence there, which is why it's interesting that the tradition says that Bezalel was gifted and knew how to manipulate the Hebrew letters with which God had used to create the world. You can say Mazel Tov to him. He's like a mystic on top of a builder. That's lovely. What does that have to do with anything? It's like, why would he need to know that? It's because he was creating the world. The Mishkan was a microcosm of all of creation. And by building the Mishkan, he's actually considered to be building the world. So when the Jewish people build the Mishkan, it's not like, oh, that's their nice little place to pray. That's so sweet. It's very beautiful. Nice shul, nice fundraising. It's like, no, the Mishkan is a microcosm of all of creation, but Bezalel being over that, getting that established. And we read about it in more painstaking detail than we read about the creation of the entire world, by the way, which is one chapter in the book of Genesis. And we're done, 1.5 aliyahs, we're over it. The Mishkan is like 4 parshas. It's like, because that's where the creation gets solidified, is with the building of the Mishkan. Bezalel is the one who is named for that, given that job, and he has that ability, and he has to have that ability because what he's doing is not just being in charge of a building, which he would have no business being in charge of anyway, because how in the world would he know anything about it? He's, just a few years older than playing with his Legos. So I'm not sure how that turns into being in charge of the Mishkan when you're 13 years old. And we don't mean like, oh, in those days 13 was different. It's like, no, 13 was 13. He was bar mitzvah. That's what he was. So instead of getting, Lego set, builder set, advanced builder set for his bar mitzvah present, you're in charge of building the Mishkan with all these people who are way older than you. And that's what his job was. There is another hint in creation, going back to book 1, Genesis, that lets us know that the giving of Torah is what the whole world is waiting for. Remember that song that you sing in camp? The whole world is waiting to sing the song of Shabbos. Okay, the whole world is waiting, you fill in the blank. The whole world is waiting for the Jews to receive the Torah. It's like, why? How do we know they're waiting for that? So there's a hint to it in Genesis and the description of the days of creation. So in the days of creation, we know the way it's numbered. If you go back to Genesis, in the very beginning of book 1, it describes each of the days of creation. And specifically, so we have Yom Echad, which is day 1, or one day, actually, not day 1. One day, Yom Echad. And then it says Yom Sheni, 2nd day, Yom Shlishi, 3rd day, Yom Revi'i, 4th day, Yom Chamishi, 5th day, and the 6th day has different language on page 9, verse 31. And God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. Vayhi erev vayhi voker, it was evening and it was morning, Yom HaShishi, the 6th day, not 6th day. So the others were 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, and this is the 6th. It says, why does it say the 6th? The 6th, when you have that definite article in front of the word shishi, means the 6th day. What's the 6th day? It says it's a hint to the 6th day of Sivan. The 6th day of Sivan was the day of receiving the Torah on Mount Sinai. It says creation was kind of in its, was conditional It was like, okay, we're launching it, but we don't know if it's going to actually take until we get to the 6th of Sivan. If the Jewish people accept the Torah, great. If not, what does God say? I return the world to tohu vavohu. I return it to chaos and void, because the purpose of creation is that you will have the Torah, you will live it, you'll build the Mishkan, and you will be a light unto the nations. If that's not going to happen, then there's no point to all of creation. So book 2 is the justification and the completion of that creation that got launched on that very, very first page, basically, of Genesis. So we're waiting for Yom HaShishi. We're waiting for that 6th day of creation. If that doesn't happen, the 6th day of Sivan, then we actually don't have a world. And it's going back to tohu vavohu. So it's one thing to have something be created, like the physical aspect, but with no purpose, it serves no purpose. So if you think about, this is a very minor little thing. We're going through all the things in our house, getting ready for Aliyah. So one of the things, if any of you have read Marie Kondo about, you take your things and you see if they spark joy, like, does this spark joy in my life? But part of sparking joy is like, why would it spark joy? It means it's beautiful to me. It serves a purpose. It speaks to me. I need it. I want to use it. It's like in my world, or it's just there. So in order to, and people have turned it into a verb. Somebody said to me, I Marie Kondoed my closet. So it's like a very kind of like a Yiddish thing where we take a Hebrew word and turn it into an English and add ing to it. I Marie Kondoed my closet. And everybody who's read Marie Kondo, or the thrill of tidying up, or whatever it's called, knows exactly what that means. So when you go through things, it's like there's a lot of physical things in the world, but if they aren't tied to what is it for, there's no purpose. So the beginning of Bereshit is like, let's just get everything on the scene, like all the materials that we need. We have the physical world, we have this family of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, they've got them going and they're multiplying. But until we get to book 2, where we see it's like, and what are we doing with all of this stuff and all of these people? It serves no purpose. It's actually understood as when it says that the Jewish people emptied out Egypt, the Egyptians, they're suing us again, I think, because, oh no, that's the Iranians are taking us to world court for killing them, the Holocaust under Queen Esther. But the Egyptians did try it. They did take us to world court, that we should return all the wealth that we took from Egypt. And they said, well, if you're going to do that, then you have to give the Jews back pay for their 210 years of servitude. And so they dropped that charge. So that didn't go anywhere. But to know that this is like really a thing. So what does it mean they emptied Egypt? It says they took that Egypt had managed to do part 1. They had an incredible amount of wealth, but either it wasn't being used at all, or it was being used incorrectly. So then it becomes like a desecration. It's like, if you're going to use what I gave you for that, I'm taking it away. I'm taking it away, and I'm going to give it to somebody who's going to use it right. Because it does seem kind of weird that we built the Mishkan with the wealth from Egypt, right? It seems like, it's like, really? It's like, yeah, we repurposed it. It's like, we put it back, which was, what's the purpose of beautiful fabrics? What's the purpose of gold and silver? What's the purpose of this majestic, magnificent wood? What's the purpose of all these skills? If you're going to do like disgusting things with it, you're not going to have it. I'm taking it away. So it says the Jewish people emptied it out, and they took it and said, we're repurposing this. And it wasn't like stealing in that way. It was God says, no, you need to repurpose it and send it off in a healthier direction. And it becomes consecrated in that way. So we're supposed to do that with everything we have. We have time, we have resources, we have energy, we have things, we have all this stuff. Like, is it being directed in the right way that's helping to fulfill on our microcosmic level the purpose of creation? Is this what God wants me to do with the things I have? Is this furthering God's purpose in the world? If it's just sitting there, I'm not sure you can really say that. So I have to say, I'm working on a big stack in my room, or actually in our daughter's room, of clothes to give to the Denver Rescue Mission, who gives things directly to people in need. Not that not that goodwill isn't good, because they have employment opportunities and all these other things for the store, but we have clothes and things that need to get to people who need them. You know, scarves, hats, gloves, ski pants, sweaters, baby clothes, diapers, things like that. These need to get to people. And it's like, kind of like, how dare I, honestly, how dare I have these things sitting in my house that I don't need? It's like, they are not fulfilling the purpose of creation. Somebody needs them. And from me hanging on to them, it's like, it's not appropriate. So each question I'm asking is, do I need this thing for this next chapter in my life? And if the answer is no, then it needs to be sent on its way to fulfill its purpose in the world and help somebody else for whom it would be a help. And how can I keep this here? It's like creating a blockage in the system. It's a blockage. So just even ourselves, of like, what do I have? What are my resources? Are they finding their right application? Am I using it in the right way? Am I using it the way God wants me to use it? Then if the answer is yes, then I'm actually sanctifying it. I'm making it holy, making my time holy, I'm making my resources holy, you know, all of it. And that turns my home into a Mishkan. That turns it into a Mikdash. That creates this illumination for the world, because that's what we're here to do, is show how does the world look when God's will for the world is completely manifested. That's our light unto the nations. So we're not here, we don't need to go like attack anybody, or we're not out to, you know, whatever the rest of the world. We're just here to illuminate and clarify. And that's our goal. So we say that the book of Shemot is book 2. It says it is the fulfillment of creation. It's the completion of creation. It's the return to the Garden of Eden. It is setting humanity off on the right track. And then we have been entrusted with that. And there's going to be a sequence of events that's going to send us. And I think we must have agreed to it at some point as Jewish neshamas. We agreed to be in the world, to be flung out to the far corners, to collect those sparks, bring all those things in to a place of holiness so that God's will for the creation can be done. So now we can see that book 2 may not be the most creative sounding of a title, but I think there's actually no more fitting title for this book. Lest we just see as like, okay, next book is like, it's not next book. It is book 2, the rest of the story. Okay, yes. Come to my house to help clean out. Everyone be well. Yes, clean out your house. I took things to a meeting the other night. You know, people buy you gifts that are their taste and not yours, which everybody does because you like something, like, oh, I want them to have it, which is totally lovely, and truly it's the thought that counts. Except these things are sitting there in my house. So I took them to a meeting, a dinner meeting, and I spread them out on the table, hoping that I wasn't putting out something that somebody at the meeting had given me, because that would be a little embarrassing, and said, take whatever you'd like. This one took this frame. She goes, oh, that's my favorite color. And this other person, I had a necklace. I said, you know, when I got this necklace, I knew it wasn't right for me. I always thought it really belonged to you. It really should have been yours. This other one, oh, this reminds me of a frame that my grandmother had, but it broke, and now I have it. And like, so many people were so happy. And these things have been sitting in my drawer for at least 10 years. It's like, make the world happy, go through your things. And you don't have to be making aliyah, moving, or anything else. It's just like, it's the world and the creation of stuff is one thing, purposeful stuff is a whole other thing. So God willing, we will find our own individual purpose in this world, the time that we were born, the fact that we're living where we live, when we live, how we live, and all of our life experiences have been custom designed for where we're at in human history, in Jewish history, and each of us has a unique role to play in this drama that will ultimately see its final redemption. God willing, it should be soon in our day. All right, ladies, have a great week.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Leslie, it's especially good to see you again. Nice to see you.
It's good to be here.
I'm glad to see you. All right, ladies, take good care.
Rachel Korach.
Baruch
Thank
T'Gami.
It's beautiful.
All right, take care. All right. Good night, Darlene. Thank you for joining us all the way from Israel. We're so international. I'm going to include that. I have a report that I need to put together for the Jewish experience, like just interesting factoids. So I'm just going to talk about our wonderful class and all the people, the women who come and where we're gathering from. And it's just really wonderful. It's really great. Okay, ladies, have a good rest of your day. Bye-bye.